The sun was just beginning to set when the unthinkable happened. My daughter, a sweet little girl with the most beautiful hair, was happily playing in the park. What seemed like a harmless encounter with HOA, Karen turned into a nightmare. She pulled out scissors, and in an instant, my daughter's world was turned upside down. But that wasn't the worst part. What Karen didn't know was that this wasn't just an attack, it was the start of a shocking discovery that no one saw coming. What she found in my daughter's hair left everyone speechless. It started like any other afternoon, my daughter and I at the park, enjoying the warm weather and the soft breeze. The peaceful atmosphere was something I cherished, but that peace was shattered the moment Karen, the notorious HOA member, appeared out of nowhere. She was always causing trouble in the neighborhood, but I never imagined she'd be the one to disrupt our day. I didn't think much of it at first. Karen had a way of showing up in the most unexpected places, but this time, something felt different. She wasn't her usual self. She had scissors in hand, a sharp glint in her eyes, and a look on her face that sent a chill down my spine. I immediately knew she wasn't here for a friendly chat. My daughter, oblivious to the tension, was happily sitting on the swing, her long, curly hair flowing freely in the wind. That was when Karen approached, without warning, without any regard for my daughter's well-being. Before I could even blink, Karen grabbed a handful of my daughter's hair, yanking it with force. A wave of panic washed over me, and before I could react, the scissors she was holding came down like a blade. The sound of scissors cutting through hair echoed in my ears, and my heart stopped. In a split second, Karen had attacked my daughter, cutting her hair without any explanation or reason. The world around me seemed to blur as I rushed forward, my hands trembling, trying to stop this nightmare from becoming worse. But then, just as I was about to intervene, something caught my eye, something in my daughter's hair. Something that would change everything. I knelt down beside my daughter, her body shaking as she sobbed uncontrollably. The initial shock of the attack had faded slightly, but the pain, both physical and emotional, was still raw. She clutched her head, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her long, beautiful hair, once a symbol of her innocence, now lay in tatters, uneven and hastily cut. The scissors Karen had used glinted in the sunlight, now abandoned on the ground, their purpose fulfilled in the most disturbing way. "Mom," she whispered between sobs, her voice trembling, "why did she do that?" I could barely find the words. How could I explain what had just occurred? How could I make sense of Karen's actions? But there was something more pressing, something that gnawed at the pit of my stomach. As I comforted my daughter, gently running my fingers through her hair, something unusual caught my attention. A small, folded piece of paper was tangled in the strands. At first, I thought it was just a clump of hair or debris, but as I carefully worked through the mess, my fingers grazed the paper. My breath hitched as I realized it was something else entirely. I pulled it out, my heart racing. The paper was tiny, folded over multiple times, and it had been wedged deep within her hair. I looked at my daughter, unsure if she had even noticed it, but she was too absorbed in her own pain to care about what I was doing. With trembling hands, I unfolded the note. My fingers shook as I flattened the creases, and then I saw it. The words written inside were beyond belief. The handwriting was uneven, rushed, almost frantic. It read, "You think this is over, but it's just the beginning. You don't know what's coming. Karen doesn't know what she's started." The message was short, but its meaning was impossible to ignore. Who had written this? Why had it been hidden in my daughter's hair at this moment, during this attack? I felt a cold wave wash over me, the warmth of the sun no longer comforting. This wasn't just a random act of aggression. There was something far deeper at play, something that tied Karen into a much darker web. I stared at the note in disbelief, trying to process its meaning. My thoughts were swirling, a storm of confusion and fear taking over. Was this just a coincidence, or was Karen somehow involved in something sinister? Who would go to such lengths to leave a cryptic message in my daughter's hair? "Mom, what's wrong?" My daughter's voice broke through my thoughts, her tear-streaked face looking up at me. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus on her. Sweetheart, it's okay. We're going to figure this out. But even as I said the words, I knew this was far from over. Karen had done more than attack my daughter physically. She had left behind a message that meant we were now part of something bigger, something dangerous. I looked at the note again, searching for more clues, but there was nothing else. No name, no further information. Just a warning. My mind raced, running through possible scenarios, trying to make sense of it all. Why had Karen attacked my daughter? Why had she left this note? Let's get you to the car, I said, trying to steady my voice. We need to go home and get you cleaned up. We'll figure this out there. I gently helped my daughter stand, her small frame still trembling from the shock. The world around us seemed to blur as I led her toward the parking lot, the note still clenched tightly in my hand. The air was thick with tension, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking straight into the eye of a storm. As we got in the car, my daughter stared out the window, lost in thought, while I kept glancing at the note. My grip tightened around it as I turned the key in the ignition, trying to push down the fear rising in my chest. At home, I sat down at the kitchen table with my daughter, the note placed in front of me. My mind was racing with questions. Who was behind this? Who had sent that note, and what did it mean? I knew I had to figure this out, but I also knew that confronting Karen was only the beginning. I needed answers, and I wasn't going to stop until I had them. Mom, do you think Karen did this on purpose? My daughter's voice was barely above a whisper, but I could hear the fear in it. I sighed deeply, rubbing my temples. I don't know, but something tells me this is bigger than just her. I think there's more going on here than we understand. My mind was already working overtime, piecing together the fragments of what had just happened. The more I thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces began to fit together. Karen wasn't just an angry neighbor. She wasn't just someone who randomly picked on my daughter. This attack, it felt planned, intentional. The scissors, the note, they weren't just random acts of cruelty. I had to dig deeper. I began to think back to everything I knew about Karen. She had always been the type to make trouble, to stir up drama in the neighborhood. But had I missed something? Had there been clues along the way that I had overlooked? One thing was certain now. I couldn't let this go. The note wasn't just a warning. It was a message, one that was meant to send me down a path I hadn't expected to walk. I stood up abruptly, startling my daughter. I'm going to find out what this means, I said, determination setting in. And when I do, Karen is going to regret ever messing with us. I didn't know where this journey would lead, but I knew one thing for sure. I was no longer just a concerned mother. I was going to uncover whatever secrets Karen was hiding, and I was going to make sure she never hurt anyone again. As I prepared to dig into the mystery, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was only the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change everything. As I sat there, staring at the note in my trembling hands, the weight of its words began to settle in. I had hoped it was a misunderstanding, that maybe it was just some kind of sick prank. But the more I thought about it, the more the chilling reality sank in. Karen wasn't just an annoying neighbor. She wasn't just someone who loved to make life miserable for everyone else. She was hiding something much darker, something sinister that none of us had suspected, and that the discovery in my daughter's hair was just the tip of the iceberg. I paced the room, running through the possibilities. Who could have sent the note? Who would go to such lengths to hide something like that in my daughter's hair, of all places? It wasn't just a random act. It was calculated, purposeful. There was a reason it had happened at that exact moment, and I had to figure out what it was. It was late. The house, quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of crickets outside. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't rest. Not until I knew the truth. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through the few messages I'd exchanged with Karen over the past few weeks. Nothing out of the ordinary. No signs of anything suspicious, just the usual complaints about yard maintenance and noise. But then a thought hit me. What if Karen had been involved in something much deeper than a few petty neighborhood disputes? I needed answers, and I wasn't about to sit around waiting for them to magically appear. The first thing I did was call some of the people who lived near her, people who had lived in the neighborhood for a long time. They might know something I didn't. As soon as I mentioned Karen's name, the responses were immediate, almost too quick. "Oh, Karen," one neighbor said, her voice laced with disbelief. "You don't want to get involved with her. Trust me. She's trouble." "Trouble?" I repeated, my pulse quickening. "What kind of trouble?" The woman hesitated, then lowered her voice. "You really don't know, do you? I thought everyone knew. She's not just some HOA member. She's a lot more complicated than that. You need to be careful." I pressed her for more, but the conversation quickly ended when she became nervous. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said anything," she muttered before hanging up. It was a dead end, but it told me enough. There was something about Karen that the neighbors weren't willing to talk about openly. The fact that they were afraid to discuss it only made me more determined. I spent the next few hours digging through old neighborhood records. There had to be something hidden in plain sight, a paper trail, a mention in an old email, anything that could link Karen to something darker. After what felt like an eternity of searching, I found it. A name. It was buried in an old neighborhood email thread from a few years ago. Karen had been involved in a dispute with another family, a family that had disappeared not long after. I had never heard of them, and the email didn't give much information, just that the family had moved away under mysterious circumstances. There was also mention of some legal action, though the details were vague. But there was one name I recognized. Serena Williams, the name of a woman I had met at a few neighborhood parties years ago. Serena was the one who had just disappeared, her entire family moving away, without a word. No one ever spoke of them after that, as if they had vanished into thin air. It was a connection I couldn't ignore. I quickly searched for Serena Williams and discovered something startling. A few years ago, there had been an investigation into her disappearance, but it was closed quickly, the authorities citing lack of evidence and no foul play suspected. The case had been dropped, and the neighborhood had moved on. But I couldn't let it go. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became that Karen had something to do with it. Her involvement in the HOA, her control over everything in the neighborhood, it was all starting to make sense. She wasn't just a petty troublemaker. She was a master manipulator, someone who had been pulling strings for years. I needed to find out more about that legal dispute. Who else had been involved? Who had known the Williams family? I started reaching out to old residents of the neighborhood, but it wasn't easy. No one wanted to talk about it. And when they did, their words were hesitant, filled with fear. Finally, I spoke to someone who had lived in the neighborhood the longest, a man named George who had seen it all. He didn't hesitate when I asked about the Williams family. "Karen's behind all of it," he said, his voice grave. "You don't get rid of a family like that unless you have something serious to hide." My heart pounded in my chest as I listened. She was always in the background, pushing for things to go her way. George continued. The Williams family fought back against her, and they were the only ones who really knew how to stand up to her. The rest of us just stayed out of her way. I leaned forward, barely able to contain my curiosity. "What do you mean by that? What happened to them?" George sighed deeply, as though he had been carrying a heavy burden for years. They started digging into her past, asking questions, looking into her history. And that's when they started getting threats. Eventually, they left, packed up and vanished without a trace. Some of us think Karen had something to do with it, but no one ever proved anything. The room felt colder suddenly. I had been right all along. Karen had a dark past, and the disappearance of the Williams family was only the beginning. She had secrets that were so dangerous, they could ruin everything she had worked for. And she would do anything to keep them buried. My mind raced as I thought of the note in my daughter's hair. "You think she's involved in the Williams case?" I asked, barely able to believe it myself. George hesitated, then nodded. "I wouldn't be surprised. She's been covering her tracks for years, manipulating people to get what she wants. And if she's willing to hurt a child, she's capable of anything." The room seemed to close in around me. I felt like I was unraveling something I wasn't prepared for. The more I dug into Karen's past, The more I realized that I wasn't just fighting a neighbor, I was fighting a woman who had been hiding her true nature for years. A woman who would stop at nothing to protect her dark secrets. And now it was clear. I had to stop her. I had to expose everything before it was too late. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something far more sinister. What had started as a seemingly random attack on my daughter had quickly transformed into something much deeper. This wasn't just about a woman with a vendetta or a petty neighborhood dispute. No, Karen was hiding something dark and dangerous, something that went far beyond the confines of our neighborhood. I had to keep digging. I couldn't rest until I uncovered the full truth, no matter how deep I had to go. The discovery of that note in my daughter's hair had shaken me to the core, but it also sparked a fire within me. I knew that what Karen had done wasn't just random cruelty, it was calculated, intentional, and most importantly, it was connected to something far darker than I could have ever imagined. Over the next few days, I set out on a mission to find answers. I started talking to people who had known Karen longer than I had. Neighbors, old friends, anyone who could shed light on the woman I thought I knew. But the more I spoke to people, the more I realized how little I actually knew about her. Karen had a way of manipulating people, of making herself look like the victim, when in reality, she was the one pulling the strings. I spoke to one of her old friends, a woman named Barbara, who had known her since their school days. Barbara was hesitant at first, unwilling to say much. But as I pressed her, her guard slowly came down. "You don't know her like I do," Barbara said, her voice low and cautious. "Karen is different. She's always had a way of getting people to do what she wants. She's always been in control, always had this power over people. It's like she knows how to push the right buttons, how to make people fear her without them even realizing it." I frowned, the words hanging in the air. But why would she do this? Why would she attack my daughter? Why would she leave that note in her hair? Barbara hesitated, glancing around as if checking to make sure no one else was listening. "Karen has a lot of enemies, people she's crossed, people who've tried to stop her. But the thing is, she's always one step ahead. She's always been able to manipulate people, make them believe whatever she wants them to believe. She's dangerous, more dangerous than you think." Her words sent a chill down my spine. Dangerous? Karen? I thought I'd known her, a petty, controlling woman who made a career out of stirring up trouble in the neighborhood. But now, the pieces were starting to fall into place. This wasn't just about her being a busybody or a troublemaker. This was about power, control, manipulation, and I had only scratched the surface. As I continued my investigation, I came across a few more unsettling pieces of information. There were rumors, whispers among the neighbors about Karen's past, about her involvement in things no one dared speak about openly. One name kept coming up in my conversations, Diana Shaw. The more I asked, the more people seemed to recoil at the mention of her. It was as if just saying the name could bring trouble. I dug deeper. Diana Shaw. Who was she? What had she done to make people so afraid? It didn't take long to find out. Diana Shaw was a former neighbor of Karen's, someone who had lived in the same area many years ago. She had been a quiet woman, not much older than Karen, but with a reputation for being kind-hearted and generous. At least, that's how people remembered her before she mysteriously disappeared. Rumor had it that Diana had been close to exposing something about Karen, something so dangerous that it forced her to leave without a trace. It was said that Karen had been running some kind of underground operation, something illegal that involved blackmail and manipulation. The people who spoke about Diana said she had gotten too close to the truth, that she had seen something she shouldn't have, but no one knew what exactly it was. Diana's disappearance had been swift, without warning. One day she was there, and the next she was gone. No one had seen or heard from her again. The authorities were never able to find any leads, and the case was quietly closed. The pieces were starting to come together, but they didn't make any sense. Why would Karen go to such lengths to protect whatever secret she was hiding? Why would she involve my daughter in this? The more I learned, the more I realized that Karen wasn't just a petty HOA member with a grudge. She was involved in something much darker, something that I had unwittingly stumbled into. I couldn't keep going like this. I had to confront Karen. I had to demand answers, even if it meant putting myself and my daughter in danger. But the thought of confronting her, a woman with so many secrets, so much power, made my blood run cold. I had no idea what she was capable of, but I knew one thing: she wouldn't back down without a fight. The next morning, I made my decision. I couldn't let this go. My daughter had been hurt, and I wasn't going to let Karen get away with it. But I also knew I had to be careful. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about exposing the truth, no matter what it took. I had no idea what I was walking into, but I had to do it. I gathered my thoughts, trying to steady myself. The plan was simple: confront Karen, get the answers I needed, and expose whatever she was hiding. But nothing about this felt simple. I wasn't just dealing with a neighbor anymore. I was dealing with a woman who had a history of manipulating people, of getting away with things that no one else would. A woman who had gotten away with far too much. I knew I had to be careful. Karen was dangerous, and if she felt cornered, there was no telling what she would do. But I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to let her control me or my daughter any longer. The moment had come, and I was ready to face whatever it was that Karen was hiding. The day of the confrontation arrived, and my nerves were a whirlwind of anxiety, determination, and anger. I knew it was coming, the inevitable moment when I would have to face Karen, the woman who had manipulated, deceived, and hurt my family. The weight of everything I had uncovered hung over me like a dark cloud, and I knew that when I stepped onto her turf, I had to be prepared for anything. I took a deep breath as I stood in front of her house. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat reminding me of what was at stake. I wasn't just confronting her about the attack on my daughter anymore. It wasn't just about the scissors, the note, or her role in the neighborhood drama. No, this was much bigger now. I was going to expose the truth, the secrets she had buried for years, and I wasn't going to let her hide behind her facade any longer. I rang the doorbell, my fingers shaking slightly. Seconds felt like hours as I waited for the sound of footsteps from inside. When the door finally creaked open, Karen stood there, her usual smug expression plastered on her face. She was dressed in her signature uniform, the neatly pressed blouse and black pants, the perfect picture of a woman in control. But there was something in her eyes, something flickering beneath the surface. It was as if she knew what I was about to say, what I was about to uncover, and she wasn't prepared for it. "Can I help you?" Karen asked, her tone polite, but her eyes betraying the slight tension I could see in her body language. She hadn't expected me, not like this. "I need to talk to you," I said firmly, standing my ground, "about my daughter, and everything you've been hiding." Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, but her expression remained calm, almost detached. "Hiding? I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play dumb," I shot back, my voice rising with anger. "You know exactly what I'm talking about. The scissors, the note in my daughter's hair, the threats, the manipulation. I know about everything, Karen, and I'm going to expose you for what you really are." For a moment there was silence. The air between us seemed to crackle with tension, and I could see her struggling to maintain her composure. It was clear she hadn't expected me to confront her head-on like this. But she quickly regained her poise, her lips curling into a thin, controlled smile. "You're making a mistake," she said coolly, her voice low and steady. "You don't know what you're getting into." I took a step forward, refusing to back down. "I'm not scared of you anymore. Not after everything I've uncovered. You can try to hide behind your perfect little neighborhood, but it's over. I'm going to make sure the truth comes out, whether you like it or not." That was when the first crack in her facade appeared. Her eyes flickered with something, fear, or was it something darker? I couldn't tell, but it was enough to make me press on. "You think you know everything, don't you?" Karen's voice dropped to a near whisper, the control in her tone now laced with something I couldn't quite place. She stepped back slightly, then looked at me with a look that could have frozen water. "You think that, after all these years, you've somehow figured me out. But you're wrong. The door creaked open a little wider, and Karen stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. If you're so determined to make this a bigger mess than it already is, then come inside. Let me show you what you're really dealing with. Against my better judgment, I stepped over the threshold. The moment I crossed into her home, the atmosphere felt different, colder, heavier. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I realized this wasn't just a confrontation about my daughter anymore. Karen was trying to draw me into something much more dangerous, something that had far-reaching consequences. We sat down in her living room, the furniture arranged in perfect symmetry, as though everything had been meticulously planned. The house was pristine, almost sterile in its perfection. But beneath the surface, I could sense the darkness creeping out of the corners, like a shadow lurking just beyond reach. Do you really think you can just expose me, like I'm some small-time criminal? Karen asked, her voice sharp and cutting now. You have no idea what I'm capable of. You have no idea what's at stake. I clenched my fists, my patience wearing thin. I know you've been hiding something. I know about Diana Shaw. I know about the Williams family. I know you've been pulling strings in this neighborhood for years, manipulating people, making them fear you. Her eyes flashed with a dangerous glint. You're barking up the wrong tree. You don't know who you're dealing with. I leaned in, my voice unwavering. Then, tell me what happened to Diana. Tell me why the Williams family disappeared. Tell me what's really going on. Because I'm not backing down, Karen. I'm not going to let you keep hiding behind your perfect little life. For a moment, Karen said nothing. The silence between us stretched, thick with unspoken words. She stared at me, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she stood up, her movements deliberate and slow. She walked toward the window, staring out over the neatly manicured yard, as though she was weighing her options. Finally, she turned around, her face hard, her eyes cold. You want the truth? Fine, I'll give you the truth. But you're not going to like it. She walked over to a cabinet by the wall, unlocked it, and pulled out a thick leather-bound folder. She set it on the table between us, her fingers lingering on the edge as if reluctant to let go. You think you know everything, but there are things in this folder that no one, not even the authorities, could ever uncover, Karen said, her voice low but tinged with a sense of power. Things that would destroy everything you've ever believed in. You think I'm the villain? You haven't seen anything yet. My heart raced as I stared at the folder. The truth, finally laid out in front of me. The answer to everything. But the question still lingered. Was I ready for what was inside? Would I be able to handle it, or would the truth push me into a darkness I wasn't prepared to face? I reached out, my fingers brushing against the edge of the folder, the weight of what was about to unfold pressing down on me. But just as I was about to open it, Karen's voice stopped me cold. If you open it, there's no going back, she warned, her gaze intense and unyielding. You'll wish you never started this. I didn't pull my hand back. I wasn't backing down now. This was the moment. The truth was waiting, and no matter what it cost, I was going to find it. And with that, I opened the folder. The folder in front of me felt heavier than it had a moment ago. I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me, but it wasn't the relief I had expected. No, this felt more like a warning that I was stepping into a world where the rules no longer applied. Karen had built her empire on lies, manipulation, and control, and now the walls were closing in on her. But she wasn't going to let this go without a fight. The truth was coming out, but at what cost? As I flipped through the pages, I saw just how deep her involvement went. There were records of blackmail, documents that linked her to shady dealings and illegal operations that spanned across the city. Names of people who had disappeared, businesses that had gone under, all tied to her in one way or another. But there was more. Hidden among the pages were details about my own family, notes, photos, and references that made it clear she had been watching us for longer than I had imagined. I felt a cold chill run through me as the implications sank in. Karen had been orchestrating this from the very beginning, pulling strings in the background, watching every move we made, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now it was all unraveling piece by piece. But as the truth emerged, so did the tension. In the hours following my discovery, the neighborhood was electric with gossip and suspicion. People whispered behind closed doors, eyes darting nervously at each other. The foundation of trust had been shattered. Karen had her back against the wall, but she was still dangerous, still powerful. I could feel the ripple effect in every conversation, every glance. People were forced to pick sides. The truth had divided the community, and not everyone was willing to face it. Some people were too afraid of Karen's wrath, too invested in their own safety to confront her. Others simply couldn't believe it. They couldn't reconcile the image they had of her with the woman revealed in those pages. She had been their friend, their neighbor, the woman who hosted barbecues and played the role of the caring community leader. But now, all of that was a lie. The day after the confrontation, I found myself in the middle of a heated argument with one of my neighbors, Jane, who had always been close to Karen. She had been one of the people who had given me the most resistance when I started digging into Karen's past, and now, as I tried to explain what I had found, her anger was palpable. "I don't believe it," Jane snapped, her hands trembling as she shook her head. "This is all just a misunderstanding. Karen has always been a good person. She's helped me and my family countless times. You're making a huge mistake, dragging all of this out." I shook my head, my voice steady but firm. "I don't want to believe it either, but the evidence is right in front of us. Karen's been lying to all of us. She's been manipulating us for years. She's behind so many of the things we thought were just coincidences. People have disappeared, families have been ruined. It's all connected." Jane's face paled as she looked at the folder in my hands. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She was torn, caught between the woman she had trusted and the undeniable truth staring her in the face. After a long, tense silence, Jane spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "But if it's true, if everything you're saying is true, what are we supposed to do? We've all been fooled. We've all been complicit." I felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just Karen who had betrayed us. It was the entire neighborhood, the people who had turned a blind eye, who had ignored the signs because it was easier than facing the truth. Everyone had played a part in this, whether they knew it or not. And now the damage was done. Relationships were strained beyond repair, and the damage to the community was irrevocable. But as Jane's words lingered in the air, I knew that Karen wouldn't give up easily. She was already planning her next move, already calculating how to get back in control. The longer this dragged on, the more dangerous she would become. And I had a sinking feeling that things were going to escalate quickly. That afternoon, Karen came to my house. There was no warning, no message. She just showed up, standing in my driveway with her arms crossed, her face hard as stone. She had come to reclaim her power, to remind me that she wasn't going down without a fight. "I hope you've had your fun," Karen said, her voice cold, her gaze unwavering. "But this is where it ends. You're making a huge mistake exposing me like this. You think the truth is going to save you? It's going to destroy you." I didn't flinch, but I could feel the pressure in the air between us. It was a battle of wills, now a struggle for control. And Karen was not going to go down without pulling every string she could to ensure she came out on top. "You don't get to decide how this ends anymore," I replied, my voice steady, but there was a fire burning behind my words. "I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore." The tension between us was palpable. I could see the wheels turning in Karen's mind, and I knew that she was trying to figure out how to turn this around in her favor. But she wasn't as confident as she had been. I could see it in the way her eyes darted around, the way her jaw clenched, the subtle crack in her armor. The truth was finally taking hold, and Karen knew it. "You think you're the only one with power?" Karen spat, her anger rising. "You're not the only one with secrets, with leverage. You're just one piece in a much bigger game. You have no idea who you're messing with. You've gone too far." As she spoke, I realized just how far Karen was willing to go to keep her grip on the neighborhood. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for everything she had built everything she had controlled, and that made her dangerous. The confrontation left me shaken, but it also solidified my resolve. Karen was cornered, but she wasn't giving up without a fight, and that meant I couldn't either. In the days that followed, the tension in the neighborhood became unbearable. Everyone was on edge, waiting for the next move. People who had once been allies were now divided, choosing sides as if they were in a war. Some supported Karen, still believing she could do no wrong. Others, like Jane, had started to see the truth, but they were afraid to take action, to stand up against her. But I knew one thing for sure. Karen wasn't going to win this battle. She had pushed too far, hurt too many people, and now the tide was turning. It was time for the final confrontation, and this time I wasn't backing down. The neighborhood may have been fractured, relationships may have been broken, but I wasn't going to let Karen win. The truth would come out, and she would be exposed for everything she had done. There was no turning back now. The days that followed felt like a blur of emotions. The truth had finally come to light, but it was far from the relief I had imagined. The weight of what we had uncovered hung heavily in the air, and the cost of exposing Karen's dark secrets became clearer with each passing moment. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't come without sacrifices, but in the end, justice was served. I had never expected the confrontation with Karen to be the final act. There was no neat resolution, no happy ending where everyone suddenly forgave each other and life returned to normal. No, this was far more complicated than that. The repercussions of what had happened would ripple through our lives for months, maybe even years. People in the neighborhood had picked sides, and those who had once been close friends now found themselves standing on opposite sides of a line they couldn't uncross. Trust was shattered, and in its place was fear, uncertainty, and a deep sense of betrayal. But despite the fractures in our community, despite the damage that Karen had caused, there was a sense of clarity now. The truth had been exposed, and there was no turning back. Karen's reign of terror was over. She could no longer manipulate, no longer control. Her facade of a perfect, respectable neighborhood leader had crumbled. And while the aftermath was messy, the justice we had fought for had been achieved. It wasn't without its costs, though. Karen didn't go down quietly. The more we dug into her past, the more we uncovered, and the more dangerous it became. As her secrets unraveled, Karen resorted to desperate measures. She tried everything to save herself, bribes, threats, manipulation, but nothing worked. The people she had once controlled were no longer afraid. Her web of lies had been exposed, and with it, the power she had held over everyone began to slip away. The final blow came when the authorities stepped in. After months of pressure, after months of gathering evidence, the truth was finally undeniable. Karen's involvement in illegal activities, her role in orchestrating disappearances, and her manipulation of the neighborhood were no longer a matter of suspicion. The police moved in, arresting her and charging her with a long list of crimes. The community was left in shock. No one had ever imagined that the woman who had once been at the center of everything was now the one being led away in handcuffs. As I stood in the courtroom, watching Karen's trial unfold, the reality of everything that had happened began to settle in. It was hard to comprehend the scale of her deception, the depth of her manipulation. How had we all been so blind? How had we let her control us for so long? The answers were complicated, but in the end, they didn't matter. What mattered was that justice had been served, and that Karen would never hurt anyone again. But even as the gavel came down and Karen was sentenced, I couldn't shake the feeling that something else had shifted within me. The discovery that had started with a simple pair of scissors, that had started with a random attack on my daughter, had grown into something that changed all of our lives forever. It wasn't just about exposing Karen anymore. It wasn't just about getting revenge or making her pay for what she had done. It was about the impact it had on all of us, on me, on my family, on the entire neighborhood. In the weeks following Karen's arrest, I found myself thinking about how much we had all changed. The truth had torn apart the lives we had known, but it had also brought us closer in ways we hadn't expected. People who had once been too afraid to speak up were now standing together, united in the face of adversity. We had all been complicit in Karen's actions in some way, whether we had known it or not. And now we were forced to confront the consequences of that. But there was something else, something that stayed with me long after the trial ended. It wasn't just the pain of the past that lingered, but the understanding that we had all been living in a lie. The community we had built, the friendships we had formed, had been built on false foundations. Karen had been the glue holding it all together, and once she was gone, everything started to fall apart. It was a harsh reality, but it was also liberating. The truth had set us free, but it had also opened our eyes to just how much we had lost. And then, the most shocking twist of all came. After everything had settled, after the dust had begun to clear, I received a phone call. It was from the police, and the message they had for me left me speechless. "We found something else," the officer said, his voice calm but serious. "We found something in Karen's files, something you need to see." At first, I thought it was just another piece of the puzzle, another clue that would help explain why Karen had done what she had done. But when the officer mentioned it was about my family, a cold feeling spread through my chest. My heart pounded as I drove to the station to meet him. What could they have found? What could be hidden in Karen's files that involved us? When I arrived at the station, the officer led me into a small room, his expression grim. He handed me a file, and as I opened it, my eyes widened in disbelief. There, in the pages of the file, were photographs of my daughter from years ago, photographs of me and my family, moments that had been captured without our knowledge. I flipped through the file, my fingers trembling as I absorbed the full extent of what was in front of me. Karen hadn't just been spying on us for a few weeks. No, she had been watching us for years. Every move we made, every step we took, had been documented in those files. She had known us, studied us, in ways I could never have imagined. And she had been keeping track of everything for a reason I still couldn't fully understand. The officer explained that these files had been part of a much larger operation, one that had involved more than just the neighborhood. Karen had been using her power and influence to gather intelligence on people, on families, on anyone who could be of use to her. It was part of a bigger scheme, one that had gone unnoticed until now. My heart sank as I realized the full scope of what Karen had been doing. She hadn't just been a petty tyrant in the neighborhood. She had been a mastermind orchestrating things behind the scenes, pulling strings to create a network of control that spanned far beyond what any of us had imagined. But even as I processed the shock of this new discovery, I knew one thing for sure. We were free now. The truth had come out. Karen's power had crumbled, and her manipulation had ended. But the discovery that had started with a pair of scissors would continue to haunt us, shaping our lives in ways we couldn't fully understand yet. And as I left the police station, I couldn't help but wonder how many other families had been affected by Karen's web of lies. How many lives had been changed because of her thirst for control. The truth had set us free, but it had also revealed just how deep the damage went. For us, it was over. But for everyone else caught in Karen's web, the aftermath was just beginning. And that, in its own way, was the most terrifying thing of all. If you think this story was wild, just wait until you hear the full truth about Karen and the shocking secrets she tried to bury. Trust me, you won't believe what we uncovered. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss the next jaw-dropping chapter of this journey. And I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below, and let's see how far this story can spread. Don't forget to hit that bell icon so you get notified the moment the next shocking twist drops. What happens next will leave you speechless.